Freddie Tavarish Hernandez has been a wonderful friend to me, an amazing collaborator on projects like Car Trek, and an awesome storyteller here on VINwiki. So today, we've compiled his top 10 VINwiki car stories for you to enjoy. But I hope you'll also check out today's video sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp is trying to make therapy easier, more accessible, and more affordable than ever before. They've got an amazingly easy process that allows you to go on, set up an account, take a quick survey, and they'll match you with a therapist that's perfectly suited to give you the help that you need, whether it's with depression or anxiety or just anything that you're going through in life. I'll be totally honest, long before this sponsorship was in place, last year I was dealing with some things in my life and I wanted to find somebody to talk to. So I turned to BetterHelp, actually through a link in one of Tyler Hoover's videos, to get some therapy and someone to talk to. And I gotta say, the results were awesome. The problem that I was running into is that the way that I was framing the problem made it fundamentally unsolvable. And so with some perspective from the BetterHelp therapist, I was able to get things figured out and feel an awful lot better and find a path forward, because that's really what it's all about. There's always things that are depressing us in life, even if it's not your impossible to fix McLaren P1. And so finding people through BetterHelp can make that a whole lot easier and a whole lot better. And if you visit betterhelp.com/VINwiki, you're going to get 10% off your first month. So check them out now, either at the link in the description below or just type in betterhelp.com/VINwiki to get some therapy and get the help you need. But today, enjoy Freddie's top 10 VINwiki car stories.
I might die. I might actually die. So in my youth, I was a up-and-coming car flipper. At least I tried to be. I would buy cars, work on them a little bit, modify them, and then sell them on. And I was kind of like a wheeler dealers, but with no money and working out of my parents' driveway. One time, I bought a sight unseen Porsche, and I'm a big Porsche fan. I loved Porsches for a while, but I've never actually owned one. And this isn't actually a Porsche. It's like the black sheep, the 944. But this one was a 944S. It had a 16 valve engine. It made 100 and something horsepower. I don't know, something thereabouts. But it was more than the 8 valve. And it was pretty rare. So I found one on eBay, running and driving, and the guy wanted $1,500 or something. But since I was 18 and had basically no money, I decided to lowball him, as you would, because you're 18 and you have no money. That's all the money you have, and you want a Porsche. So I offered $800, and he took it because it was a project car that he was getting rid of. But nonetheless, he said it ran and drove. At the time, I was living in New Jersey, and the car was in Connecticut. That was about a 3 to 4 hour drive. I decided that I would elect the help of a friend with a car just to drive me over there. And then I would bring the car back just on its own volition, with me getting a temporary tag or something. I embark on this journey with my friend, and we're so excited to get this car. And I'm thinking, well, these cars are going up in value, they're rare. This one is in great shape. I mean, it wasn't in great shape, but it's in great shape for a car flipper. I can do a lot with it. All the parts are there, they just need to be put back on. Sort of your loss is my gain. And when I got there, it was quite a different story. It was not really a runner. It had some rat's nests. It definitely had a fair few animals living in it, now deceased. The interior was just kind of strewn all over the place. So I had chair literally like 90 degrees, just kind of thrown in there. All the dash panels were everywhere. Obviously none of the AC worked, nothing like that. And the car wouldn't start. So I had to basically go to a auto parts store. And this is at the tail end of a day where we spent 3 hours at the DMV trying to get a temporary tag for this. I went to the auto parts store, got some spark plugs, did an oil change basically in this guy's parking lot. And the guy was like, well, it ran when it got here. And I'm like, okay, well, it doesn't run now. So we eventually got the car to start. It had some really bad gas. Apparently it's been sitting for a year or more. So the gas congealed, it just turned to varnish. And the car then kind of limped to life running on 2 or 3 cylinders. I want to, maybe 3, I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. So it could move under its own power. I drove it down the street and it was very, very sketchy. But it was good enough where I can now embark on the journey of the 3-hour drive back home. So that might have been a mistake, and hopefully, if my mom is watching, I'm sorry. None of this is true. So, or you can just turn it off right now. You don't want to listen to this. So a very young and quite stupid me embarked on this journey from Connecticut to my parents' house in New Jersey, where I was driving this $800 Porsche 944. And it was making some crazy racket from the engine area. There was a lot of smoke, quite alarming amount of smoke coming from the engine because the valve cover had a good size hole in the gasket. So it was dripping directly onto the exhaust manifold and creating a lot of smoke coming into the cabin. The windows worked halfway. I think the passenger side window didn't work at all, but I could lower down the driver's side window, but I couldn't raise it back up. It was just weak enough not to go back up. When I started on the highway, which is something you definitely do want to do when you have an $800 car running on 3 cylinders, I realized that the car had a really bad alignment problem. So it would veer to the right very violently, but it was good because when I pressed the brake, it veered to the left. But when we got on the highway, you have trucks going 85 miles an hour near you, and I'm like, I might die. I might like actually die. And then it started raining. And then there was a torrential downpour, which is a good time to realize that your windshield wipers don't work. So the windshield wipers don't work. The only thing I had in the car was an oily rag that I used to check the oil. I'm doing, I want to say 60, and I'm sticking my hand outside like this, like it's Ace Ventura or something, sticking his head out the window with all his glass cracked. I'm trying to wipe off the torrential downpour. Trucks are going past me. I have no idea how I made it home that night. It was pretty interesting. That was the most sketchy thing I've ever had as far as a car. To its credit, maybe it's a Porsche thing, but it started running a little better. I think that 4th cylinder came back alive around hour 2 or 3, and it started actually making a lot of sense. I could rev it out a little bit. I don't want to take any chances here, but it was quite a nice experience when I came back home, other than the alignment being like seriously sketchy. When I got it home, I realized that the sway bar on one side was completely disconnected, wasn't even connected to the car. So one side was getting some tension on the sway bar, which was just shoving it in one direction, and with the brakes, one of the brakes was just not working. So it had way more air in the line than it needed, and the correct amount of air is 0. So it's like if you get home and you realize that the sketchy ride that you just took is way worse than you could have ever imagined. It's kind of like Wolf of Wall Street, when you think everything's fine, and then you look under the car like, wow, this is, I was very, very, I was on the edge of certain death here. So yeah, definitely, when you're driving cars sight unseen back home, you should probably look underneath them just to see that everything is connected. Yeah, after I fixed that, the car actually ran very well. I got all that old oil and old gas and all the fluids out, and the car ran beautifully after that. I had to change the filter, and I had to do a bunch of stuff as far as cosmetic mods. But, that car actually made me, I think, somewhere around $1,000 worth of profit, which is not great in the realm of Porsche cars, but for a 18 or 19-year-old me, that was a lot. It was just fantastic. That's something I hope to never do again, but who knows? Knowing me, I might just do that again. It was kind of fun. Like, there's a little part of my brain that goes, I kind of want to do that again. The saying goes, it always runs best before it dies. And I don't know if that's an actual saying, but I'm saying it now because that's what happened to my McLaren 675 LT. Now, if you guys don't know, my McLaren 675 was the biggest project I've ever had on my channel. It took me 2 years to rebuild it. It was a wrecked car that was red, and then it became a show car that was all fixed up and blue. And I was super, super, super proud of it. And we filmed a series of Car Trek on it, Car Trek 9. And then I realized that I never really registered it. I mean, I've been using temporary tags for its entire life on the road, but I wanted to actually just drive this thing every day. I mean, it's a cool car. I wanted to take it to car shows. You know, I didn't want to have to put like transport tags or temporary tags on it. So I decided to do everything that needed doing on this car, which is like little knickknacks, like little trim pieces falling off, you know, make sure that those are in place, make sure it didn't have any error codes, nothing like that. Now, this car was not stock. It had a custom paint job, had a custom interior, sort of like a custom livery. I wanted to make it into an homage to the McLaren F1 that we actually drove in Car Trek 5. And it was a car that was very, very special to me because it represented something that, like, I built something that I couldn't afford to buy new. That's sort of like the ethos of my channel. So I had this car that was like, you know, 10 out of 10 in my head. Then I modified the engine, which was upped with some power from a tune. We got some bigger turbos, downpipes, exhaust. This thing spit flames. It was absolutely insane. It was faster than a stock one. And I wanted to share it with as many people as possible. So after I did the little knick-knack fixes and just waiting to get this thing to the inspection because it was a salvage title, I wanted to share it with a bunch of people. So it just so happens that I had a week where basically everybody from the UK, all the YouTubers like Shmi and Matt Armstrong and Sam Hart from Hard Up Garage, they all came to my shop. I don't know for what reason, just to hang out, I guess. And I said, hey, you need to check out my McLaren. So I took Shmi out in it. We did like some launch controls. We did some pulls. He really liked it. I liked the fact that he had one and he can compare it. And the jury's out on that. I don't know how he felt about it, but hey, I like my car. Then I took out Matt Armstrong, who's this other YouTuber that is completely blowing up with his rebuilds. And then he loved it. And he said it was actually faster than his twin turbo Gallardo. And then I took out my friend Sam Hard, who has been on VINwiki. And Sam is a very, very good dude. I mean, he'd give you the shirt off his back, and I wanted to give him a nice experience with this McLaren. And we set out, and I wanted to warm up the oil a little bit. Like, the car was a little bit cold. The coolant was up to temperature, but the oil wasn't exactly up to the halfway point. It was like 3/8, but it wasn't like completely cold. So I take it on this road near my shop where we usually just kind of do pulls with cars because it's a completely desolate road. There's no traffic and it's just a straight line for about half a mile. I get into second and then I roll into it. I don't mat it because I know that, you know, cars need time to kind of adjust to things and I don't want to, you know, just blow the tires off this thing. So I roll into second and we get to about 6,000 RPM, the boost starts building, and the car is, you know, you can tell that the car is fast, it's making a lot of noise. And then it feels like the worst traction control in the world just engaged. So it goes like that, and then the car started decelerating, and it sounded like there was marbles in a can behind me. Immediately, I knew something's up with the engine. Something just happened that is very bad with the engine or transmission, and it just sounded like a grenade went off in the back of the car. And then I looked in my rearview mirror, and there was a slight bit of smoke coming out, and I was monitoring this just sort of in slow motion because I was like, if this smoke turns into fire, we are in bad shape because the fuel tank is right in front of the engine. So if something catches on fire there, we got to get out of the car real quick. I have a fire extinguisher in the car. I may try to save it, but I want to make sure that I don't kill myself or my friend. Thankfully, the car wasn't on fire, but the car just basically screeched to a halt. I get out of the car and you can see this giant trail of oil just going back like 300 yards. This is big bad. This is real big engine damage. You can see that the oil was actively, like, it wasn't even dripping. It was just like Like you just opened a tap and all the oil came out of the bottom of the engine. Immediately, I call up Jack, my friend who was back still at the shop. I say, hey, the McLaren just blew. Like the engine just blew up. And, I can hear his voice go, oh no. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? It's okay. Like it still hadn't hit me at that point. But I was like, hey, these things happen. It's a modified car. I probably should have waited for the oil to warm up or something like that. But, it's nobody got hurt. We're not, we didn't go skidding off the side of the road. We didn't, injure anybody else. It's just a car that broke. So they get there, and immediately it's Sam Hard's friend Chiro and Scott Radarosa, who's another YouTuber, and everybody has their GoPros out and everybody's doing their little vlog thing, which was very interesting. And they helped me push it basically a half mile back to my shop, which was in itself no small feat. It was an experience that, like, one, I wouldn't wish upon anybody because this car it meant so much to me. And it's a car that if you were to replace an engine, it costs more than you think. So McLaren doesn't just sell you like a short block, which is like just the bottom of the engine with the crank and the rods and the pistons. They have to sell the entire thing. And the entire thing for a 675 is like $75,000. So with a $75K bill for me in the future, that didn't feel right to me. I didn't like that. And not only that, I realized through actually Arnie Toman, who runs Cannonball Garage, they work on a lot of these engines. A 675 in particular, they wanted to make them, like the internals of the engine, as light as possible. And they did that for horsepower, and that's wrong. Because when you do things for horsepower, you want to make them stronger, not weaker, and that engine is really weak. So what happened with that engine is that the rods, instead of being metal, they turned themselves into pretzels, like they were made of bread, and then they just twisted. One of the rods just disintegrated. I don't know where it went. Those engines are just like super, super weak. And I found that out the hard way. So if you have a McLaren and you want to up the power in your McLaren, do some engine work. Make sure the engine is built, at least the rods, because then what happened to me is going to happen to you. It's not a matter of if, but when. When we actually got the car back to the shop, I took off the pan. Immediately, I saw parts of the engine just strewn about. So we had like wrist pins and rod bearings all mangled up. It looked like a grenade went off. And then we had like 3 or 4 holes in the block. Usually blocks like in engines don't need windows. They have good enough cooling. That engine, the complete block was toast. It took out my oil pump, took out my coolant, took out my water pump. So now I'm on the lookout for a 4-liter from like a 720S because I'm really smart and decide that, now I can go for more power. Now I can make the car faster because if I'm going to spend the money, why not make it, better and then, see what else breaks down the line. Maybe it's my transmission or an axle or something like that. But this is sort of what happens when you have a modified car, especially a modified supercar. Now I'll make a comparison to DD in their 720, and they hoon that thing around all the time. They do donuts and burnouts and launches and all that stuff. They made this thing into a crazy, I don't know, it had 800 or 900 horsepower. But they broke their block in half because of the same thing that happened to me. Their rods just let go. So they ended up having to do a complete built engine, and that for them was probably like $100,000, just looking at the parts that they have. So these engines aren't cheap to build, they're not cheap to buy, and they're certainly not cheap to break. But as far as an experience, having your friends in the car and recording the stuff, it makes it for a lot. It's gonna be. Now you have this white stained denim, splotchy mess. So most people think that I am, a little bit crazy when it comes to car purchases. And for the most part, I think that they're wrong. But this actually might be crazy because I bought a van, which is not an exotic, it's not any sort of supercar, it's not a sports car, it's not sporty at all. I bought a van, regular minivan, except for the fact that it was on a little TV show called Pimp My Ride. And on the show, they took this van from the regular minivan thing that you see
everywhere in every mall and every parking lot. And they made it into this incredibly garish, loud, pink and purple mishmash of 2004 car culture that you can ever see. And not only that, this van was then neglected after the show was over. So if we're talking about Pimp My Ride, there were a lot of exposés over the years about like the truth about Pimp My Ride. And I don't know much about it other than the fact that I just bought one of these cars. But what I do know is that they actually did do all the work to these cars, and they worked their butts off to get these cars out in time. I mean, you're talking about 6 seasons and 20 episodes each. That's a lot of cars. Plus, you got to work on other people's cars because these are legitimate shops. You have West Coast Customs, you have Gas. These are legitimate shops doing the legitimate work for a lot of people. And what a lot of shows do, there's a lot of car shows that are kind of like cooking shows where they have 2 cars and they'll have one finished and they'll buy one that's a junker and they go, oh my God, see us tomorrow. We have to get this done and the customer's coming and it's not very legitimate because they get from point A to point B in like 7 days and they go, wow, we really pulled it together even though that build took 6 months. But Pimp My Ride, I don't think that they took the entire build into account. I think that they had a few months to do it. I know that the people that they pimped their ride, those people were basically left without a car for a few months. And they had to be on their own. They either rented a car, MTV wouldn't reimburse them, or they had to get another car, which is kind of, it defeats the purpose of doing this. But I do know that they did give them the cars. I think they had clauses in that they couldn't sell the cars, and they also took off modifications. So my van actually had this one modification called a vroom box. Now, if you never heard of a vroom box, it's not like you're living under a rock because nobody's ever heard of a vroom box. It's because it was a company that was supposed to be launched by this episode, as far as I can tell, but they never made any products. So I went to the Vroombox website and I tried to get this thing, and they don't sell any. Now, what a Vroombox is it's a bunch of speakers, and it's a module that allows you to sound like your car to sound like any other car. So you can make your car, a Dodge Caravan, sound like a Ford GT or Aston Martin Vanquish or something, you know? So they had that installed in the show, but before they gave it to the girl who was the mark, I guess, they took that out. So now underneath the car where the spare tire used to be, there is just nothing. So they would put that big subwoofer enclosure where they had piping all the sounds of the supercars, but now they don't have that. So I know that they took out a lot of those things for safety reasons. Like this is just like you can't put a fish tank in a car. Like it's just what happens if you crash. Like that's not something that they can do. But everything else was in the car. So I decided to take it upon myself to buy this van and restore it. It's a bit of a tall order when your usual fare is exotics and supercars and that sort of thing, because I actually have never worked on a van. It's it's a little bit out of my comfort zone, if you can believe that, because I had to go to Advance Auto Parts and order a bunch of stuff, and oddly enough, they had everything in stock. So that was kind of a weird. It wasn't a coincidence because I guess that's what they do. That's actually why the stores are there. But me going and ordering $3,000 worth of parts for a van was just kind of like a weird mental thing for me, because the van wasn't worth that much. Now, I originally saw this van years ago, like 4 years ago, in a Jalopnik article. It was for sale somewhere in Boston. It was just rotting away in a Boston, I think, dismantler's yard, and it was for sale for $1,400. Needed a little bit of work. The van was a little tired, but it ran and drove. Flash forward to 4 years later, the van was still for sale, but now with a way better shrewd negotiator price of $850. So I immediately saw this as an opportunity because I've never seen a Pimp My Ride van. I want to see what it's like. So one of my favorite things about this build is the fact that I found it on Auto Tempest, and I've been using Auto Tempest for many, many years, and I've found lots of my cars, and it just so happens that just cruising through, I don't know what I was searching for. It might have been like rare or sport or famous or something like that, and then it just popped up, and I was like, oh, okay. And the fact that it was still available, I was like, All right. So basically, I had a hole burning in my pocket with money that I need to throw at this owner. So I just called up the guy, and he said, "Yeah, actually, the van is available." And me, like the negotiator I am, I offered him exactly what he asked for, and I said, "I will send you this money. I know you're a stranger." So how do you want me to send you almost $1,000? I don't know if you just made up this listing or what, but I just sent you this money. And later on, I had a car carrier pick the van up and then bring it to my shop. And lo and behold, there is a Pimp My Ride van. Now, there was a troubling amount of mold on this car. I mean, I probably should have worn gloves. That could have been a concern. I may have taken quite a bit off my life, but I got the van and it didn't have anything as far as air conditioning or power steering or alternator or anything because the belt had snapped. Not only that, all the pulleys were completely rusted, so they just didn't move. So engines tend to want to move. This didn't. Also, all the interior electronics, it had a triple flip down monitor setup. It had a footrest that also was a monitor. It had a wraparound couch that was made in denim. It had 4 monitors in the back, and none of those worked. So I couldn't get any of those to work. Also, the stereo didn't work. Also, it smelled quite horrible because over 4 years it was just in the rain and in the elements. And as you can imagine, the seals weren't great. So all that rainwater came in and it destroyed a lot of the plywood that the show used to put all the stereo equipment together. And also the fiberglass in the rear system, all that was cracking. So this van was turning out to be quite a bit of a project. But over the next 24 to 48 hours, me and a friend of mine, Jared, we got that van to basically restore. Jared did all the mechanical work, and I took care of the electronics and tried not to have too many sparks in the way. We had to resolder things. We had to run power where there was no power before, basically fixing all the issues that the show had to make this van a living, like you can live with this van now. After that, it was a matter of bodywork, so I sent off the bodywork, it had this almost one-off body kit. I think it was made by Sorona or Buddy Club or one of the 2004 era body kit manufacturers. And I can't imagine that the Dodge Caravan tuning community was large. I can't imagine that that's something that they sold a lot of. And we couldn't find new ones. So what ended up happening was I had to repair this, so I sent it off to the body shop, and a week and $1,500 later, I got this, what looked like a brand new body kit for my 99 Dodge Caravan. Now, what a lot of people don't actually know, and what I found out during the research portion of this project, is that this van wasn't exactly the van that they started with. So when they pimped this ride, they started off with a 98 Plymouth Grand Voyager Espresso. And what happened with the show is that they saw that van and they were like, we can't do anything with this because it needs mechanical work, it needs body work, all this stuff. And they decided that we're just gonna get a low mileage 99 Dodge Caravan, which is essentially the same van, but for the purposes of the show, they just said it was the same van. And I don't know if they told that to the person that was they had to. I mean, the title is different. But they presented it as the same van, and apparently that was common practice in Pimp My Ride. I'm not sure exactly how long the van build took to do, but I think it was somewhere in the order of a few months because there was a lot of work done. I mean, they ripped out the floor. They put a false floor on. There's like a dance floor plexiglass thing with neons in it. They had to do an electric actuator for the footrest monitor, which in itself weighed about 100 pounds because it's this like $1,000 piece of equipment. And they had to make a completely custom fiberglass enclosure for the back, which also weighed a ton. So this van had a lot of weight in it, and it actually wasn't that practical. There was a lot of work done to it. You can tell that it was a good shop that did it, but they just rushed everything. And with that, the van didn't fare very well as far as the test of time. Since the van had a denim interior, as you can imagine, denim isn't a great car interior because you leave it in the sun and it fades. Also, if you put your arm on denim and you rub it for a while, like as you would in a car, it doesn't really wear well. So you had all these frayed edges everywhere. You had these weird stains that you can't get out with any sort of upholstery cleaner. Even if you used the hardest shampoo and conditioner, it wouldn't come out. So now you have this white stained denim splotchy mess where the sun hit it, and there's no way to do it other than reupholster it. And I wasn't gonna do that. So it's just one of those things where I think I just left it and cleaned it as best I could, and then I just said that's the patina of the car. Now, the reason why I got the van in the first place is not because I really love vans or I really love Pimp My Ride. It's because I love cars with stories. And I figured that I could end the story by giving it to somebody else. And that somebody else is Tyler Hoover. Now, Tyler has bestowed upon me his greatest achievements, which are the F355 Ferrari that was burnt to a crisp, the Bentley Continental GT that spent 10 years in Russia, and my daily driver, my Mercedes S600, that actually wasn't bad and I do drive it every day. But I decided that since he is now expecting, or his wife is expecting, I think that he needs something a little more practical. So I decided that this van is going to be his Christmas present. So that's actually why I'm here. So I'm here because we're bringing this van, at the time of this recording, we're bringing this van to Tyler. I don't know how he's going to take it. I hope he takes it well, because that van took a lot of work and actually way more money than I thought it was going to take. But I think that it's a present that he will enjoy, his daughter will enjoy, his wife will enjoy, and hopefully his entire neighborhood doesn't think he's now selling drugs.
I'm pretty sure it's the only example with a twin turbo kit that somebody built in their garage. So I bought a Lamborghini Gallardo. It's a 2008 Gallardo Spider, and it has a bunch of stuff done to it by a previous shop. So I bought this car about 5 months ago. I bought it sight unseen, essentially, on eBay for 70 grand. And since I'm a shrewd negotiator, I got them down to 64 grand. I got the car shipped to my house. I live in Florida. It was not running because the clutch was busted. I actually ended up finding out that the clutch was seized because the car was sitting for 3 years and some water got in it, and I actually had to take a screwdriver and just pull it apart, and now it works. So this Lamborghini was a victim of a gas pump fire, and now, these cars are pretty well known for their gas pump fires. Gallardos are a little bit weird in that if you fill them up regularly like a regular car, the gas pump clicks like it's full, but it's not. So what you have to do is you have to hold it at a little bit of an angle, but then that gets rid of that click, so you could legitimately overfill this car. From the previous owner's mouth, what he told me is that he was filling up the car, and he had it cocked sideways. He had the pumps cocked sideways, and he was filling up the car, and then somebody went to talk to him. Some guy said, hey, I like your car, how fast is it, and how much did it cost, and blah, blah, blah. I think he might have been on a rally. He's like one of these Gold Rush rally types. He doesn't realize that he's overfilling the car. Now this car has 2 gas tanks. It has one on either side of the engine, and it's about 6 inches. The gas tank is 6 inches from the very hot exhaust manifold. So what happens when you overfill the fuel is that it starts pouring over, and then it starts pooling under the car. And he was on a little bit of an incline, so the fuel started dripping downwards. So as soon as it hit that hot exhaust manifold, it just went up. The gas station just put everything out as fast as possible because it's a gas station, they don't want to explode. So the car had some damage. It had some damage on the driver's side. The insurance thought that because the car was modified, something in the modification process made this car go up. It wasn't the gas pump fire. So the insurance company took the car back. They took the engine out, gearbox, all that stuff. They pressure tested the tanks, and they left the car in the state of disrepair. And they found no wrongdoing. Everything was done correctly, even though when I took the car apart, there was a lot of things that could have been done, let's say, more correctly. The insurance company gave the money to the original owner, and they left the car basically just in pieces. So they had the engine in a box, transmission in a box, and the car was it just looked like it had been in this nasty, nasty fire just because there was soot everywhere. It's a white car. This company from San Diego that I got the car from, they took the car and all they did was just slap the engine and transmission back in. They slapped the whatever twin turbo kit that was in there. They didn't know anything about Lamborghinis. They just knew how to put cars back together. And they did an okay job. I'm not going to say that it was horrible, but it was okay. There was a lot of vacuum lines disconnected, and I bought the car from them. They made a little bit of a profit, which is fine, yay capitalism. When I got the car, I had to take everything out. I took out the transmission, the engine, just to check everything. And the car was actually in really good shape. There was no structural damage. There's just cosmetic damage, just like the quarter panel. And I replaced everything. The car's at the body shop now, and it should be looking 100% soon enough. And other than the salvage title, this should be one of the cleanest examples with a twin turbo kit and I'm pretty sure it's the only example with a twin turbo kit that somebody built in their garage. It made a pretty substantial amount of power on the dyno. It's very, very loud. It's a convertible, so you have that open top experience. It's a gated 6-speed manual, which is getting more rare and rare. It's just a pleasure to drive. So I can't wait to get more seat time in it. And I want to demystify the Lambo experience. A lot of people find these cars to be unobtainium, and I mean, a Gallardo is the starter Lambo. But the starter Lambo starts at 200 grand, when it was brand new. For most people, I mean, myself included, I can't afford this sort of car. So since I got this car, I want to be able to drive it. I want to drive it across the country. I want to do half-mile events. I want to have it be a really good canyon carver. I want it to have the handling characteristics that you would expect from an exotic car. The Lamborghini aesthetic appealed to me because it almost seemed like a self-made car. Like, it's a car for self-made people. And the Ferrari is more of, you can have a self-made Ferrari, but there's like a, dare I say, snobbiness. I don't want to piss off the Ferrari people in the audience, but like there's a, dare I say, like a little bit of the snobbiness. Like, you go into the dealerships and they're not too eager to help you. The whole thing with Lamborghini and Ferrari, where Lamborghini basically Ferruccio Lamborghini bought a Ferrari, and then they had a spat, and he said, I could build a better car and all this stuff. I love that, and I think that translates into the people that buy the cars. And it was fun for me because I love a challenge. I love working on new cars, working on new projects. But I learned a few things after buying this Lamborghini, because when you buy a car that is so expensive, so bespoke, and has so many different parts that come from so many different parts of the world, you have people that, one, are jealous, two, don't know what they're doing when it comes to mechanical work, and three, might be a combination of both. So when I bought this Lamborghini, I wanted to have it run well. I wanted to have it be the best example of a haggard Lamborghini as I could. I decided to reach out to different body shops, different tuning shops and whatnot. This car was a twin turbo car when I got it. So it had been basically gone over, the engine was built, had rods, pistons, sleeves, all that stuff. It could take a lot of power, like 1,600 horsepower. It also had a twin turbo kit that was custom made by a shop, and they didn't really do a great job at it. So I had to basically redo everything from the ground up in my own garage. So that was an interesting thing. But the funny part about that is when you actually start doing that in your garage, then you realize that when you reach out to other shops that do this stuff full time and make Lamborghini turbo kits and whatnot, they don't want to work with you. So it's just one of those things where if you want to have the car tuned, which is a big portion of this sort of build, this car has a Syvex ECU, which is an aftermarket ECU that allows you to control everything about the car. It's used by race teams and all these like top tier 2,500 horsepower underground racing monsters that just dominate the half mile. Those cars use Syvex ECUs. The problem is with the Syvex ECU, they only give people training for the ECU if they're part of like this little group. And if you're not part of the group, then that information is really hard to come by. They basically told me, well, we don't know where your engine came from. We don't know who built it. We don't know what the turbo kit is capable of. We don't know if it's put together correctly. And that was fair. I mean, I really didn't know where it came from either, so I can't really fault them for that. I understand the liability aspect. But I think in life, I think there should be a little thing. Like, there should be a little card that says, I am not a dummy. I am not trying to fool you, and I'm presenting this car in good faith. I believe I should be able to give that card to them, and they should go, oh, okay, so we'll work with you. But apparently that card does not exist, so they don't know me from any other guy, and they just thought that, hey, this kid just bought some stupid Lambo that's been worked on by God knows who, and we are not going to take this project on, even though we're the only game in town as far as tuning and whatnot. So I decided to just do everything myself. And I mean, it's worked out pretty well. The car's made some power, hasn't blown up yet, which is good. When I bought this Lamborghini, I went on the Lamborghini forums, as you're apt to do, because when you get a little bit of press, when you have a YouTube channel and it gets a little bit of play, then you want to see what people are saying. You go on Reddit, you go on the forums and whatnot. Almost immediately, people are voicing their opinions, and they're saying one of two things. With Lamborghini people, they're saying, I hope he does well, and kind of well wishes, but those are like 5%, whatever. But then the peanut gallery chimes in, and they basically know, first of all, they count your money for you. And number two is they want you to fail. And if you do fail, if you have like a little bit of a hiccup or something, they go, aha! I got him right there. He is going to be penniless in a matter of weeks. And well, I mean, apparently that hasn't happened. I still have my shirts. The car is doing fine, and the internet commenters, the ones that started off saying that I will, have to eat my socks to live. I actually don't have any socks right now, so the jury's out on whether or not that actually happened. Those people have gone away. All the Reddit people that have said, well, he's bitten off more than he could chew and all that stuff, those people just tend to go away after a while. I could basically beat Lambos in this car. My first car was a 1998 Nissan Maxima, and it was a GLE. The GLE was the top-of-the-line luxury version, and it was automatic only. I bought this car working a year at Daffy's, which was a outlet store that sold clothes that sometimes they didn't fit all the way. So people got massive discounts from like mismatched socks. And I made about $6,000 just in spending money, and that's what I spent on my car. That basically started my love for modifying cars. So I bought this car and realized that it was a V6 and it had 3 liters and it had 200 foot-pounds of torque, and I was on top of the world because all my friends had Hondas and they made 130 horsepower. And over here I was king of the hill with 200 and my leather seats and my heated seats. I was feeling pretty good about myself, so I decided to do a lot of mods to my car because you can never leave things alone. I mean, you're a kid, 19 years old, and you don't want to leave stones unturned, right? Especially when you have no money and you have no girlfriends or prospects or anything to offer society in general. So I ended up doing a manual swap to this car. I changed the automatic transmission for a manual one. That made me a little bit cooler. And then afterwards, I decided to go a little bolder and do an engine swap. So I did an engine swap from a newer Maxima, which was a 3.5, and that was derivative of the 350Z. I could basically beat Lambos in this car. Like this was the, let's just call it the Maxima Performante. By this time, I'd have some sort of foothold in the forums. People knew me, and I would do a little bit of work for them on the side doing exhausts and stuff. So I had a little bit of help, and I did this sort of pioneering exercise because not a lot of people did a 3.5 swap in that Maxima. I actually tried to sell this idea to, I think it was like Super Street Online or something like that, and I said, hey, would you like to feature my car? I have a Maxima, but instead of a 3 liter, it has a 3.5. And they were like, yeah, we don't really care because that's not really interesting. 2 days after I finished this swap, I got all the bugs out. I decided to take this car to Applebee's, as you are wont to do, after 10 p.m. because that's when you get half off appetizers, because I didn't have any money. So I take it with a bunch of friends, and we go there, and it's about midnight, and we have some kind of crappy wings and quesadillas and whatever. When we come out, car's gone. There's a weird part of you when your car gets stolen. You're like, am I an idiot? Did I forget where this car is parked, even though I parked it directly in front of the establishment? This is a car that I just finished an engine swap 2 days prior, and it got stolen. It had like a PlayStation 2 in the glove box. It had it had like a system in the back. It had some wheels and suspension, stuff that I really saved up for. Since I had no money, I had no full coverage on it. So it was just a liability thing. So if they found the car, then they found it. If they didn't, then they didn't. I remember throwing my keys on the ground, breaking my key fob. My mom has to pick me up from Applebee's, and at midnight, and I say, Mom, my car was stolen. And she's like, oh no. You go back home, and I got a call at 6 a.m. from the Newark PD, because we were in New Jersey at the time. We were really close to Newark. Newark is the car theft capital of the world. And they said, we found your car. And I go, great. Okay, good. That's good. They found the car. Great. So I'll come get it. That starts the process of me going to Newark, finding out that in Newark you have to pay to get your stolen car out of the impound. I had to pay $300 to get it out because they said that, this car's been here for 2 days or something like that. And I'm like, it was like stolen last night. Like, yeah, but it was stolen last night, but it's like, then it goes into another working day, and then we charge. So it's like this real god-awful situation. And I had no money, and I had to ask my mom, can you please give me $300 to get my car out? I pay for the car, and they go, well, it's stripped, right? And I go, no, nobody told me it was stripped. They go, yeah, it's stripped. And I'm like, okay, so what exactly am I paying for? So I go to see the car. The car had no interior. The headlights, taillights were gone. Everything in the interior was gone. PlayStation system, everything. These people, the people who stole the car, they must have had a Nissan Maxima because the door panels were missing. Apparently it was found 5 hours after it was stolen. This car was just a shell of its former self. The back window was broken, and all the windows were rolled down. I guess so cops wouldn't really catch on to it, because if one window is just broken and all the other windows are up, then it just sort of seems, like it's stolen, because it was. When I first saw it, it just kind of broke my heart, because this is a thing I've been working on. I had these red clear tail lights, because it was red and yellow from the factory, but I cleared them out so they looked really kind of nice and spiffy. And I figured out when I got the car home, because I had to have it towed home, that was another $300 something. So I'm like $600 into the whole ordeal, and I have a car that is completely just trashed. I figured out why they dumped the car, because the car was found just dumped somewhere, and they stripped it and they just left it somewhere in an alleyway or like on a street or something. The shifter bushing broke. And the shifter bushing that I installed, it's underneath the shifter. It's like this little rubber shifter. For some reason, I didn't get all the kinks out when I was troubleshooting it, but you had to shift it kind of hard. I think it had to do with the slave cylinder. The amount of play that it needed wasn't enough, so you had to shift it really hard, and that introduced a lot of pressure to the shifter linkage. That rubber bushing broke, so they couldn't shift the car anymore. So it just would essentially just stay in gear, or it would just be in neutral. So I think they just left the car somewhere, which was good. It's good that something broke on the car and they couldn't actually strip it and take out the engine and transmission that I worked so hard to put in. But now I had a car that was, the wiring was all a mess, the interior was all destroyed. I was really close to giving up on cars. Like, I was very close. And I was like, this cost me so much money, and I don't have a way to get to work, and it's just an ordeal. I don't feel like really putting more money into it, because the cars, it's a Maxima. It's not really going to be worth anything. It was worth something to me, but that's only because, I'm a kid and it's my first car. Since it had the 3.5 engine still in it, I decided, all right, maybe I can save this, but it's going to take me like a year to just bring everything back, because I have to find another leather interior. I have to find maybe somebody that's parting out, and maybe it's not going to be a 98, maybe it'll be a 95, and I don't really like those seats. Those seats are older, and they might not have the same wear, or whatever. The Maxima Forum guys, unbeknownst to me, they got together and they created a GoFundMe before GoFundMe was a thing. So they got on the forum and they said, we're raising money for this guy. Because at this point, I've helped some people in the community. I did like a 3.5 swap how-to, like a tutorial. And I did a bunch of tutorials and just like, I was a mainstay in the Maxima community. They got together and they said, we're gonna raise some money. If you have any parts just lying around, send them here. Basically, we'll help them out. So it was like everything that I needed. And it was one of the things where it's like you restore your faith in humanity. These people that don't know me from anybody, it's a complete stranger, and they're like, they find it in their hearts to give me, whatever parts. And some of these were like $high parts. Like these were nice parts. I got like JDM headlights, which was like, they had these like HIDs in them. Somebody said, if you want to pick up a full interior, I have one. And it was like in Baltimore. I'm like, I'll come and get it. It was like a 2-hour drive. So I went and I got a full interior for the car. I mean, the car was totally rebuilt like within a month, and people gave money. I mean, it wasn't like, I wasn't flush with cash. I think it was like a few $100 at most. These weren't rich people, but there's a lot of people that gave parts and they restored the car. And this is the car that the internet built. And that's how they basically kept me from giving up on cars in general, which is kind of nice. I mean, the second time my car got stolen, not that car is never stolen again, but I had another car stolen, and I was smart enough to get the insurance this time. I got full coverage, and it was an Audi, and I bought it for $1,000, and then it was insured. I think the Blue Book value was $5,000. And it got stolen and recovered in Newark the same way, but I didn't really have anything in that car. The only thing I liked about that car was the red seats, but then when I got the car back, I just said, you know what, you can keep it. Insurance gave me $5,000, and so I made $4,000. And I always make a joke about that, saying, I don't wish to see the person that stole my car, but at this point, I probably owe him lunch.
I am a fully loaded Nissan Versa with a few grand in your pocket, just in bumpers on this car. So the last time I was here in the VINwiki HQ, I brought my Lamborghini Murcielago for Ed to see and sort of make fun of, because it was at the time the worst example of a Lamborghini that I've ever seen, and hopefully anybody's ever seen, because nobody should see a Lamborghini in that state. It's just bad. So I proceeded to take that car and build it into a $1 million show car here. So I basically made it in the image that the movie Fast and the Furious 8, or Fate of the Furious, wanted it to be. I wanted it to be the hero car that it never was. Now, for those of you that don't know, movie cars aren't very well taken care of. If you ever go to a museum or anything like that, you'll see a movie car and just look at the interior, or look at the paintwork, or look at the bodywork. It's always metal screws, it's always like self-tappers, it's always duct tape, and it's always wearing very, very poorly. It's extremely rare that a movie car actually looks as good as it does in the movie in real life. But I wanted that real life experience, and I also wanted a nice Lamborghini, so I decided to completely restore this car. It was originally gonna be just a throw around, daily driver, nitty gritty Murcielago, but then it turned into this insane restoration project where one layer turned into another layer, turned into $10,000 to $20,000. And I learned a lot, and I learned what to do and what not to do. And my bank account learned a lot as well. So here's what it's like to go from a really used and abused movie car into a SEMA show car in the span of about 9 months. So I started off with this movie car, and it had a roll cage that was bolted into it. It had the windshield that was taken out in the back. It had windows that didn't roll down. It was stuck with a piece of wood. It had an exhaust that was a straight pipe, so you were literally piping exhaust gases into the cabin as you were driving. So that's not good for your brain cells. It can't be. It had electronics that didn't work. The engine sounded very, very raspy. It sounded like two really angry 350Zs getting in some sort of boxing match. It also didn't have very good tires, the brakes were tired, and the paintwork was atrocious. So I decided to strip all that down, took the bumpers off, took the roll cage off, decided to do a lot of things to the engine bay, did a full tune-up, did a complete exhaust system, and the paintwork was actually one of the most integral parts. So I had the paintwork done by a shop called Color Recon, and they found out that there were 11 layers of paint on the front fenders. Now, the reason for this is not because they just love painting the car so much, it's because during the filming of the movie, they had different color schemes. Originally, the car was, instead of being orange like it is now, the car was supposed to be Arctic camo. So it's supposed to be like white, gray, and black and like little Arctic, what looks like an Arctic camo on a ghillie suit or something. And what happened was when they went to shoot it out in Iceland, in the movie it was supposed to be in Russia, when they got it out onto the ice, the cameras couldn't pick it up. It was really hard to see. I guess Arctic camo kind of does its job. So they decided to paint it essentially in a parking lot somewhere in Iceland. So you see these horrible, horrible runs everywhere. And when they shot, they were shooting in the scope of about 3 months. They shot so much that they had to redo bumpers. They had to make their own molds for bumpers. And as you can imagine, the fit and finish of making your own bumper that's based on copies of copies of copies, there's a little bit of leeway, and the what looks good from 100 feet away on camera might not look good from 5 inches. So the fit and finish and quality was completely horrible. Also, they kept on respraying the car because, well, the car got a ton of rock chips. It got a ton of damage during filming. And it was just one of those things where it became the paint was like half an inch thick. It was disgusting. So all that had to be hand sanded, because if you put it in a situation where it was like media blasted or soda blasted, that could harm the carbon fiber underneath. Because I don't know what the structural integrity of carbon fiber is in Italy in 2003, but I can't imagine it's good. Everything was hand sanded, and 11 layers of paint takes a little bit of time. So all that was taken down right to the bare primer. Then they went over it with a guide coat. Then they went over it with a base coat. I mean, this was coat, sand, and then we can have the color layer, which is Arancio Argos, which was a launch color for the Aventador. And then we had 7 layers of clear because we wanted that nice sparkle. And then they also wanted to make sure that they could have a very level and flat finish. And we also did some body work. Lamborghinis don't really dent because they are made of carbon fiber. Carbon fiber doesn't dent, it just cracks. But what happens on Lamborghini Murciélagos is that every Murciélago that you see, if it hadn't had paint work and it hasn't been in the body shop like me or Ed's, they have these things I like to call old man dents. Because people that buy them usually are old men and they need help getting out of the car. So what they do is they put their elbow on the roof of the car, the very, very thin steel roof, and they make a little crease with their elbow. And every single Lambo has this. It has this little wave right next to the door. So all those were taken out. We had a lot of complications because the actual car has way too many angles. I mean, you'd think that, oh, it's just, a straight car, and no, it has so many ins and outs, and everything has to be painted, and there's some things that have to be taped off. And the entire thing, if I didn't work out a deal with this company, would have cost somewhere upwards of $40,000. And the paint alone was somewhere in the vicinity of $2,000. Just the paint, sitting in the bucket is $2,000. But that would be manageable if I didn't have to buy new bodywork. Now, the bodywork that I thought was good on the car, the body shop called me and they said, well, we can't do anything with this because it's basically a homemade bumper, front and back. And as Fast and the Furious is wont to do, they didn't use the stock bumpers. I could get stock bumpers on eBay that needed a little bit of work for a few grand. It's expensive, but I can get them. Fast and Furious did not do that. They used a aftermarket Premier 4509 kit made by Veilside. And Veilside is kind of a running theme with Fast and Furious. They had a Veilside kit on in Tokyo Drift and in all the other Fast and Furious movies. They had Veilside as a premier member. But this body kit was so rare, and as you can imagine, the marketplace for a Mercy body kit is not huge. So these were made to order, if not discontinued. So I got in touch with the one supplier that makes these, and they said, yeah, we can get them to you, but it's a 60-day wait at the very least. They have to be made in Japan. And if you want the front bumper, that's going to be $10,000. Well, $10,000 is more than I would spend on a car. So I said, do you have any other options? They're like, oh yeah, so $10,000 is with the carbon fiber option. If you want it just for fiberglass, that's $5,000. I went, okay, well, $5,000 is still way more than I would spend on a bumper. So I said, okay, well, I need a front bumper. This is something that's going to be literally the face of the car. So I said, okay, let's do $5,000. So I pay them the money, wait 60 days, and then I get the bumper, and it's in decent shape, but I wouldn't say it's 100%. I mean, for a $5,000 bumper, you'd want everything to be, you'd want it to do your taxes for you at this point. So I got that on, it got painted at the body shop, everything's good. And then they look at the rear bumper and they go, we can't use this. And I go, great. Okay, good. Because I thought that the rear bumper was actually serviceable and they could make something of it. And they're like, yeah, it's gonna be like 150 hours just to get us to, refiberglass things and make sure that things line up, because there were like real big issues. They would have to section it and stuff like that. So I said, okay, let me work on getting a rear bumper. So since now I know where I can get them. And it turns out the rear bumper is $12,000. Now, that was for the expensive carbon fiber bumper. But I said, I know that you guys have cheaper bumpers. So how much are your cheaper bumpers? They go, okay, it's like $6,000. Okay, it's a little bit more than the front bumper, but it's for a show car, so it's fine. So let's do the bumper for $6,000. Yeah, we don't have that. So the only one we have in stock is the carbon fiber one, which is $12,000. So I can get that for you in a week, or you have to wait more than 60 days, and hopefully we can get this in stock, maybe. So I spent $12,000 plus $5,000. I am a fully loaded Nissan Versa with a few grand in your pocket just in bumpers on this car. So that was a real wake-up call, because a lot of people don't know this about exotic cars. There are like levels to them. When I started doing this with my Lamborghini Gallardo, that was one level. That was like the entry level. That's like a little bit above like an Infiniti or a Lexus. Like you'll pay $1,000 or $2,000 for a bumper used. But then you have a level above that where it's like the luxury and exotic cars that were one, handmade, two, they didn't make any of them, and three, they're old and nobody has parts for them. So it's not like people are stocking these things. So I was dealing with all of that, and every single part in that car was very hard to get, and it was extremely expensive. So let me just go over like a little bit of rundown. So $17,000 in bumpers. If I wanted to do the little bumper eyelids, they are the flaps for the washers. Each of those are $750. That doesn't even include the washers. That doesn't include the actual bracket. Just the covers alone, $750 each. I didn't buy them. I made them myself from aluminum, and I just double-sided taped them on. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Also, I had a bunch of tubing that goes to the alternator. It is a cooled alternator, an air-cooled alternator. That is about $300, just a tubing alone. It's about 8 feet of tubing. So it's $300 for Lamborghini. However, I got some tubing from an aircraft supply place for $25. So it's exactly the same thing. It's actually a little bit better. And the tubing then connects to a duct, which is another $900, and it's special order from Italy. The jury's out on whether that comes in time for anything. So what I did is I made a attachment from my wet dry vac because it looks the same. I made a little bracket, and nobody's the wiser, and it does exactly the same job, and it was literally free. But the things I did have to pay for were, well, let's say the retail cost on everything that I did. With the paint was about $40,000. The interior, which was completely trashed, I had that redone in a very nice pattern with diamond, not even diamond stitching. It was a hexagon stitching from the newer Audis and Lamborghini Huracans. I had a forged carbon center console. I had everything redone to look like a modern car, like my envisioning of what a modern car would look like. That was about $25,000. Then we have wheel refinishing, which was another $1,000. We had tires, which was another $2,000. Like it just adds and adds and adds. And also all the little nickel and dime parts that you go, oh yeah, I'll take care of that later. Those parts takes months to come in, and they're always a 3 or 4 digit number. So I'm looking forward to when I make the video of going down my entire receipt list and seeing what that number is at the end, because that number is going to be very surprising. Now, I bought the car for $80,000, which was the lowest price of any Murcielago up to that point. Any running Murcielago. I'm sure that there's some salvage title ones that went for less. But this car now is I believe well over double that, which is in the range of where a normal Murcielago would go. But now I have some provenance, and now it drives very nicely. And now it's just a car that I can just drive around and be proud in and potentially take to shows, or if a museum wants it or something like that, then that's the car to show. I don't know if I would do it again, because it was an insanely stressful experience taking that car to SEMA, where thousands of people could see it up close. That was a very stressful experience indeed. So I don't know. At the end, you kind of, you get a Lambo, you work on it, you realize that they're all sort of kit cars in the end, and they're not built very well. And all the screws and the fasteners, they're made with such a standard that, well, let's just say that Lamborghini standards in the early 2000s weren't putting Toyota out of business. And what was underneath was extremely ugly and horrifying. So a little while back, I realized that I needed a McLaren in my life. And McLaren had been this car company that I always revered, because McLaren F1 was my favorite car, just as well as it was a lot of people's favorite cars. I couldn't afford a McLaren F1 because those cars are $20 million now. Now, my second favorite McLaren is the P1, and the P1 is also an unobtainium car, and that is many millions of dollars. I couldn't afford that. But the third favorite McLaren was a 675 LT, and while that car right now is around $225,000 to $250,000 on the used market, there was one that I perhaps could afford, and that was one that had been crashed in the front and back and had been going through various salvage auctions for the past 3 years. It was a 2016 Delta Red McLaren 675 LT, and this was one of those cars that you see on eBay or Auto Trader or something, and it's like they have a easy fix in the description. Oh, it just needs a fender and a bumper and you'll be fine. It didn't run and drive, but it was probably because of a battery. The AC just needs to be recharged, that sort of thing. Really easy to work on, really easy to repair. Turns out that's not the case. So I bought a 675 LT for $80,000, which is a big discount from what they are used, but there's a reason for that. Because this car had frame damage in the front and the back, it had engine damage, it had cosmetic damage, has a whole lot of cosmetic damage, and boy are those parts not cheap, and boy are those parts not easy to find. The 675 LT, for those that don't know, is basically a 650S with every little bit being a little bit better. It was our track-focused, mostly carbon fiber body with more power, less weight. It was the send-off to that chassis. The MP412C 650S ended in the 675 LT. That was the top version and the last version before they went to the 720. I really loved the look of that car. I loved the lines. I thought it was a very, very good design. And I loved the back end because it was a little bit wider than the 650S, and it had a proprietary rear end with a big wing. I mean, they called it LT for a long tail. It was only, I think, like 2 inches longer, but ask any woman, 2 inches makes a difference. So if you look at the car from a design perspective, it was exactly the same as a 650S. However, if you look at the car when you're actually trying to buy parts, that was a completely different thing. The 675 LT, they only made 500 in the world, 500 coupes and then 500 spiders. So you have a really rare car on your hands, and when you have as much damage as you had on mine, you start to run into issues. So before I got into the project, I was looking at this car for years. At first, it went up for auction about 3 years ago, and it went up for auction and it sold for $126,000, which was good money 3 years ago. I mean, the car would have been almost new. And then it went up for auction again, and it sold for $100,000. Then it sold for 90. Then it sold for 80. Then it sold for 80 again to me. And the reason why it sold so many times is because people thought that this car just needed bumpers, maybe an alignment, maybe some new wheels, and maybe some cosmetic repairs, and then it would be good to sell to the next unsuspecting buyer. But that's not the case. This car needed a lot of structural components, not only structural in the metal in the front and back, but the carbon tub. And the carbon tub is a expensive component and not something that you could fix easily, well, not traditionally. So when I got this car, I had to take everything apart. I took off all the carbon fenders, the rear quarter panels, the front end, the rear end, and it allowed me to see what was actually underneath, and what was underneath was extremely ugly and horrifying. So the way this car became so damaged was back in 2017, this car went across a few lanes in Chicago on an October night, and then it went into a tree backwards, and then it rode up onto the curb, which destroyed the bumper and also destroyed part of the suspension, because this suspension has this really high-strung, high-pressure system, and one of the accumulators on top of the strut exploded. That must have been scary. 2,000 PSI just exploding right in front of you, and it ripped apart part of the front fender. So when I got the car all taken apart, I realized that the rear subframe, essentially the rear frame that holds the engine in place, that was just twisted in, so it was narrower than it should have been, and it also was like kind of off kilter, so the wheels weren't exactly where you left them from the factory. And in the front, I thought that everything was okay. I thought that it was only body damage. You know, you get a new front bumper. Not so, because the subframe on one end was a 1/4 inch higher than the other end. So I needed a new subframe, I needed a new rear frame, and the engine had been punted by that tree, had been ripped off its mounts and punted into the gas tank. And that caused damage to the engine mounting, that caused damage to the turbo, that caused damage to the gas tank. Everything needed rebuilding. So from that point, I decided that this car is going to get taken down to its last nut and bolt. This is going to be a rebuild like you would get at a McLaren factory if this thing was new. So I decided to take it down to the carbon tub, which meant taking out the engine. Engine comes out through the bottom, taking out the subframe just comes out with 6 bolts from the carbon tub. The subframe at the front, which involves taking out all the steering components, taking out the brakes, the suspension, all that stuff, and then hopefully remembering how it all goes back together at the end. I also took out the doors. One of the doors was completely messed up, and taking out the roof. And fun fact, the roof, the doors, the quarter panels, all that stuff is glued on from McLaren. It's not bolted on, it is glued on. You just need a heat gun and like a little spatula or a butter knife, and you could take the entire car apart. It takes a very long time and it's very itchy. You're gonna need gloves. I didn't use gloves because I'm a smart person. And it is something that you can definitely do. The jury is definitely out on whether I can realign it when it has to go back together, but I think if McLaren could do it, I could do it. Now, I took off the roof for another reason, because I want to have a car that's a little bit more, let's say, unique. I want a car that doesn't look like every other 675 LT out there, especially not in America. So I bought a roof that has a roof scoop in it that was brand new from McLaren. Now, McLaren would charge $40,000 for this roof panel. It is this beautiful, like, herringbone carbon fiber, and it's one piece. It glues on into place. It's really easy to install. It is the last roof scoop roof in the world, and it was bought by somebody that was gonna put it on their car but ended up not doing it. So I got that guy to sell me it. I didn't pay $40,000, but it also wasn't cheap. But I figured if I'm going to do a McLaren 675 LT, I'm going to do it my way. So that is on its way here from the UK. So I can put that together. I can put the quarter panels together. I'm gonna paint it in a color that I want. It's not gonna be a McLaren color because, fun fact, McLaren doesn't allow you to buy their colors. They have to sell it to you for a very large markup, and their colors are just trash. Their paint work is garbage. But this car is going to have custom wheels. It's going to have a custom exhaust. I love the look of the 600 LT with exhaust going at the top. So I'm thinking of doing maybe a custom exhaust that goes both out the top and the back with a valve in between them. So if I want to do party mode and have exhaust spitting flames out the top and perhaps lighting my car on fire, I can do that. Also, I want wheels that look like the McLaren F1 LM. I love those 5-spoke, like thick wheels. This is a car that I never thought I could afford in a million years. I've been watching people like Shmi 150 with his McLaren 675 LT, and I'm just like dreaming to myself, wouldn't it be nice if I had one? And now I have the chance to really like put one together from the ground up, knowing every nut and bolt was put in at least as good as I could put it in. And I'll have a car, hopefully, that works as well as it did stock. So this is a $2 million car, now becoming part of the ocean. All right, so we are in September of 2022, and there is a hurricane coming towards Florida. This is Hurricane Ian. It was quite a big deal. It was a Category 4, 140-mile-an-hour winds. Really bad news. Now, the good thing about hurricanes is that you can see them coming from like a week away. When the hurricane actually hit, all hell broke loose. You had homes being destroyed. I mean, a lot of people lost their lives, and you had a bunch of cars going underwater. There was a car, and I think we would probably call it the car because it was the McLaren P1 that everyone saw on social media, on TikTok, on Instagram, and it was just floating underwater near a tree and getting bounced into things during the hurricane. This video was taken by its owner, who owned that car plus another Rolls Royce, and he had those cars in his garage closed, and the waters came into the garage and basically broke the garage door. The cars floated out and went 500 yards down the street, then, well, went completely underwater. And everybody, I mean, literally everybody on the internet sent me a message saying, hey, you need to get this car. You need to get this car. And I thought, well, I can't afford that kind of car. I mean, this is a McLaren P1. It's a hypercar. It's part of the Holy Trinity. And it's a car that on its worst day is worth $1 million. And this car in particular was supposed to be the record setter for McLaren P1s. It only had 305 miles. It went on Bring a Trailer and it had a no sale at $1.57 million. And they were hoping that this would get like 2 million, 2.2, something like that. So it no sale at Bring a Trailer, then this guy buys it for reportedly $2 million, something like that. So this is a $2 million car, now becoming part of the ocean, in front of people's eyes, millions of people's eyes, as a hurricane hit. And then afterwards, about a month or two later, it shows up on Copart. And Copart is a site where you can buy salvage cars. I mean, it doesn't have to be exotics, but salvage, crashed, wrecked, that sort of thing. And usually you can find deals, but on this car, they wanted to make as big a stink as they could, and they tried to get it in as many publications as they could, and it worked. I mean, Road and Track wrote about it, Jalopnik, Autopian, everybody wanted a piece of this because they didn't know where it was gonna go. So on Copart, the listing only had like 7 or 8 pictures, and they were all a little bit further back. You would want details. You would want to see if, the carbon was damaged, or if there's any, crabs in the intake, or something like that. This car went up for sale once, and it no-sailed at $400,000. Now, $400,000 is a lot of money. It's a lot of money for any car, especially a car that's been underwater. Now, the speculation there between me and Ed Bolian and Houston Crosta and a bunch of other people in the exotic rebuild car sphere is that this car would fetch anywhere between $250,000 and $800,000. And 800 was like the crazy, crazy price. Like no one would ever pay that, but 250 is what kind of the smart money would buy it for. It no sailed at 400, meaning that the owner of the car, the insurance company, they said, we want more money because they just paid out a ton of money for this car to the owner and that car plus the other car that was in his garage. So then they decided to put the car back up for sale on auction a week later because they were like, oh, maybe people didn't know about it. So they publicized it a little bit more. They put it on their blog and then it sells for $398 the second time. This entire time, I'm watching it like a hawk. I don't have this kind of money. I really don't. And I would have to sell many of my cars to maybe get there, not even counting what the parts would be for that car. I mean, it's a one of 375 hypercar. And this is like the holy grail of McLarens for me personally, but I knew I could never afford it. But then it went up for sale a third time, and I felt like at this point the universe is calling to me. Like the universe is just saying, hey, Freddie, you need to buy this car, and you need to make this happen. So what happened the third time is that they put a buy it now on it. And the buy it now was $600,000. And I was like, 600 grand is a lot of money. I mean, I could maybe stretch that if I sold like 3 of my cars really, really quickly, and then I'd still be losing money. But then the universe came through again because the buy it now went from 600 to 575 in like 2 days. And then I said, okay, well now it'd be stupid not to buy it. I asked one of my friends that has made some good financial decisions in his life, and he knows about me and making my bad financial decisions. And I asked him, hey, do you know anybody that could loan me $500,000 like within a week? And then he said, you know what? I do. And I went to this bank and I told them, hey, I'm a YouTuber and I want to buy this Flood McLaren P1. It doesn't work. It probably was all the way underwater and everything needs to be replaced. And they gave me a loan in like 3 days. So now I had the money to buy this car, and I ended up buying the car at the buy it now price because I make really good financial decisions. As soon as I hit the buy it now and the money goes through, I start freaking out because I'm like, this is more money that I've spent on any car ever. This one doesn't work. And this has so many eyeballs on it already that I don't know if whatever I can do to this car is going to live up to whatever hype they built in their own heads. So the time came to get the car, and this was like within 24 hours. Like I paid for the car and then I went to get the car the next day. So me and my friend Jack and my friend Rex, we took his Toyota Tundra with a $2,000 open trailer, and we went to get this $2 million hypercar that was sitting in this Copart lot. We get there, and the first thing that they hand me was a cardboard box, like a USPS box, and it has the keys, it has the owner's manual, and a bunch of little manuals for like the radio and stuff like that. That owner's manual went on eBay for like $5,000. And they just handed it to me. I mean, it was pristine. It wasn't in the flood or anything. It was fine. But it was just like, you just handed me thousands of dollars worth of stuff. I haven't even seen the car yet. This is really, really cool. So we go around their yard, and they had this P1 in their special little warehouse lot right all the way in the back. Not to be, confused with the riffraff, You don't want it with the mixing with the other cars. That car was in its own little warehouse with the other car that was in the guy's garage, which is a Rolls-Royce Phantom, a brand new one, which was in itself worth probably $500,000. So we open up the door, and there it is. And automatically, I get a cold sweat, and I get like a sinking feeling, but also I get really excited because I see the car and it is so much worse than what I saw in the pictures. So the pictures are interesting because what the camera does is it hides a lot of crimes. I mean, to take a phrase from Adam Savage, you can't see the carbon damage, and there was a lot of it on camera. But when you see it up close, you see that every single panel is damaged. One thing about the McLaren P1 is that every panel is carbon fiber. They didn't use any plastic, they didn't use any cloth or anything like they used on the 12C and 650S of the day. That car was completely bespoke, especially like body-wise, and everything needed replacement or repair. So I get there and this car smells awful. It just smells like the bottom of the ocean. They didn't take any of the twigs and stuff out. Like, it was full of sand, and both of the rear tires were flat. One was flat because the tow truck driver that actually pulled it onto the flatbed, he punctured one of the tires, and then on the other side, he punctured one of the wheels. And those wheels are really thin forged aluminum, super expensive, super lightweight, and super broken now. Now, both rear tires are flat. This car can't move because the e-brake was still on. It has an electronic e-brake, and I can't power up the car to make those go off. So we spent the next 4 hours trying to get it onto a trailer. We used dollies. We actually got into the trunk, with the front trunk, because there is like a keyhole that you can kind of finagle open. And we found the tow hook, and that was still in okay shape, albeit a bit rusty. And we spent the next several-ish hours getting this car on the trailer, and then the next day getting it off the trailer. And then I can see what the car was actually like. And it was bad. It was so bad. So let me give you a rundown of what this McLaren P1 needed. It had 316-ish very easy miles and 500 yards of really just terrible treatment. It was damaged on the diffuser, the hood, the clamshells, and there are two big clamshells, one in the front, one in the back. Those were damaged because it's just hitting trees and stuff like that. The panels were misaligned because water pressure does weird things to panels. The doors had cracks in them. The glass in the front and the glass on the top, it actually has two glass panels on the top. Those are both broken. The glass in the back shattered, completely gone. The carbon fiber panel that opens up to allow you to charge the car, that was gone. So that's somewhere in Fort Myers area. The taillight it looked like a tree went through it. There was a giant gaping hole in the carbon clamshell in the back. And on the bottom of the car, whenever the tow truck driver, this is my favorite guy in the world at this point, when he got the car onto the flatbed, it was sitting on what looked like a toilet. And I don't know if it was a toilet, it just kind of looked like one. And he dragged it, and when it dragged, it put a gouge into the carbon tub, like the actual structure of the car. So now there's just like a nice little zipper rip in there. And then on the inside smells like electrical fire because it has a battery, and the battery is a really big hybrid battery that allows the car to get to 903 horsepower, plus its internal combustion engine. It allows the car to drive in electric only mode for like about 6 miles. It's a really cool feature of the car, and that, just by the smell alone, looked like it fried completely. The inside was also completely full of corrosion and salt. Everything on the inside was submerged at one point. So usually when you have these Copart listings for a flood car, they have this like little drawing on the side of the car that says WL, which is water line. That's so you know, above this line, the electronics are probably okay. My car didn't have that because the entire thing was underwater. I mean, the roof scoop where the air goes in, that had sand in it. So this was like the worst of any flood car possible, really, because not only was it underwater, it was a saltwater flood. And a saltwater flood plus like a bunch of debris just went in everywhere. As you can imagine, when a hurricane comes through, it's not a clean thing. I ended up having to take off the clamshell, and then I saw the actual engine, which is like, stuffing 10 pounds of crap in a 5-pound bag. Like, they really put a lot of things into this car. And every single part was either corroded, not a ton of rust because they didn't use a lot of steel and nothing, like no iron that could rust. But you did have corrosion on aluminum components that had this process called electrolysis, which like, when the battery was in its death throes, it would start eating, like the salt would start eating away at the aluminum frame. So that was really cool. They don't tell you that when you buy cars at a salvage lot. So taking this car apart was actually not that hard. And at the point of this video, I still don't have the entire engine apart, but I know that the engine is It's probably salvageable, which is like, I'm not going to count my chickens before they hatch, but it looks promising for now, but it's going to have to go all the way apart, maybe down to the carbon tub, and then even that's going to need to be replaced. But one thing that I really like, there's a lot of little wins in this build because all the connectors in the back, all the harness connectors, they're weather sealed. So like nothing got damaged in the back of the harness. So like all the electrical connections, all the ECUs and all that stuff that live in the back of the car, they were fine. But that wasn't the case for the interior of the car. That wasn't the case for the front of the car where the 12-volt battery lives. That was full of water. Basically, the engine back is okay. The engine forward, it's no good. And as you can imagine, McLaren charges a lot of money for stuff for their hypercar. The prices that I got from McLaren, if you have a private jet, I feel like sometimes the maintenance on a private jet would be a little bit less than a McLaren P1. The battery alone, I mean, it's the biggest thing in the car, but like the battery, the hybrid battery pack that sits above the fuel tank, that if you wanted to get it new from McLaren is $160,000. I feel like that's a lot of money. I feel like, for a battery, we have the technology now that, we could put hybrid batteries in Corollas and Camrys and stuff, right? They're not $160,000. I don't know why McLarens are $160,000. I mean, the Artura just came out, right? The Artura, and that car all in is like $200-something thousand. You can't tell me that battery is 160 grand. That battery is super bespoke. It's only made for that car. It was made by a Canadian company and then bought by another company. So it's like they only made a handful of these things. And the way McLaren fixes these batteries is just by getting used parts. So these are like rare as hen's teeth. If I can get one, then it's going to be an exorbitant amount of money. Now, then comes the bodywork. If you wanted to get a carbon body, an actual like exposed carbon body from McLaren, and you had like a regular P1 that wasn't underwater, it would cost you $300,000. So that all in, plus, getting it to McLaren and all that stuff for them to do it, it's another $500,000. And that's not even counting the wiring, the engine, the turbos are seized, the transmission, the hybrid drive assembly that goes in between the engine and transmission, then all the little knickknack items. I mean, like the little pumps and the hoses and stuff that can corrode that you don't know, like the copper washers on the suspension, like those can blow out because those are super high pressure. And copper and salt water don't mix, so those immediately started leaking. So now you have suspension issues, and then you have like the actual mechanical damage that you got to fix with bodywork. So I mean, it's realistic that this car would cost, if you were to go the retail route, north of $1 million to fix, and then the car would be worth probably $1 million or less. Now, a lot of people think that when you get a salvage car or like a wrecked car or something, you're actually saving money. And the the secret is you don't. It actually is not any less expensive than if you were just bought one used. And now you have a car that's worth way less because you built it, and it's also carrying a salvage title. Now, with this car, this is so much more than any other car in terms of price that I could have like bargained for. So for YouTube, this makes no sense. I mean, even taking it off of YouTube for a rebuilder, this makes absolutely no sense. But for YouTube, I may have like a fighting chance at maybe making some sort of money back. Even then, I'm going to have a P1 that's worth less than a regular retail version. But the thing that I get from it is that I built this thing and I'm going to build it the way I want. And it's going to cost me less in terms of like actual cash that I spent on it because, you can offset sponsors and YouTube ad revenue and stuff like that. And if I want to, eat ramen noodles for the next 5 years, I could put that into the equation. But a Mr. Beast video probably wouldn't pay for the rebuild of this car, realistically. And I don't get Mr. Beast numbers, so this is gonna be fun.
Dude, if I had 300 grand, I would 100%. So when people usually think of the kind of cars I buy, whether it's a Lambo that's been a little bit on fire, or a Ferrari that's been a lot on fire, or a Bentley that's spent most of its life in Russia and now has an engine that works half as well as it did, I have a standard that I abide by when I buy these broken cars as projects. Ed Bolian called me and he asked me if I wanted to take on another project, which was the Bugatti Veyron that went into the Galveston Bay. And I was pretty excited, even though this was way above my pay grade. Now, this was an interesting story for sure. So for anybody that isn't familiar with this, this was the viral video that happened quite a while ago. I think it was like 5 or 6 years ago. And this was the Veyron that was, well, he was speeding down the highway and then he went straight into the water, seemingly for no reason at all. Now, the problem was he told the insurance that a seagull had gone by his car and then he had to swerve to avoid it and he went into the water. Lo and behold, it was an insurance scam and he wanted to get rid of the car. So he actually had the engine running. He went into the bay and he wanted to just kill the car, get the insurance money. Now, Ed's done a really good job with that video and all the details there, but I'm going to give you a little bit of a backstory of what I thought of this project and how to put a Veyron back together when it's in a million pieces and it's also been flood damaged. When you take on a project like this, it's not something that you should really take lightly because one, they haven't really made too many Veyrons, and two, there's not a forum that you can go to. There's not a Veyron Owners Association that you can say, hey, how do you put these cars back together? That's not a thing that happens. So when Ed came to me and he said, is this even possible? I said, yeah, of course, anything's possible. However, there's a lot of issues that come with it. So the car was in a 3,500 square foot warehouse and it was in a million pieces. So the entire car was taken apart. And what Ed showed me as far as pictures was that it was just a bare shell. All the components were off of it. And we had to basically track down all of the parts. And there was some discrepancies of who owned what parts. So that was sketchy in itself. But I thought if we can get all the parts together, then perhaps we could make a car. And the parts that were broken shouldn't have been that big of a deal. Now the radiators, those usually are made of steel. Those don't last very long in salt water. So those had to be replaced. Now you can make radiators custom and it's not a big deal to do that. There are 10 or 12 of them in that car. So it's the cost adds up over time, but it's not that big. I mean, it is a Veyron after all. Another thing is we knew that Bugatti wasn't going to cover any of this. They weren't going to allow us to buy parts for the car. That's just not something you do. But in order to make it a DIY thing, what you have to do is you kind of have to reverse engineer the entire thing. You have to make a wiring diagram from scratch. Usually you'd have to get a factory service manual or something from the manufacturer. That wasn't available. So with the Veyron, you'd have to basically trace back everything. You'd have to look up part numbers because they are Volkswagen and Audi part numbers, which is a good thing. You can get pinouts for that, but it's going to require months and months of work. Now, the big thing that I was really concerned about was the engine and gearbox. And those, if that goes, then basically the entire project is scrapped. The car was for sale for 300 grand and with all of the parts, but we didn't know what all the parts were. So for 300 grand, if you had all the parts and you did some custom work, you could probably get away with it for under 500 grand, which for a Veyron, for a running, driving Veyron, wouldn't be bad. So what a lot of people don't understand is that there are echelons to exotic cars. You have your regular kind of Lexus and Infiniti, which have more expensive parts than a Honda Civic. Then you have a Ferrari or Lamborghini, which have parts that you could get at a dealer, but you're going to be spending 10 or 20 grand. Let's say if something goes really, really wrong. 50 grand on the highest, like an engine blows up, you're spending 50 grand. A Veyron, a little bit different in that respect. If something goes wrong on a Veyron, you're spending $250,000. And that's a margin of error that was insurmountable. Neither of us had the money to do anything like that. 300 grand is more money than both Ed and I have, but Ed had the connections. He had the financing that he could potentially do it. And I was, I guess, crazy enough to try to take on that project. And I did just get a 5,000 square foot shop, so space was not really a concern. I had the tools for it. And if need be, we could just kind of leave it gathering dust for as long as we needed until we get the right parts. So that wasn't really an issue. The big issue came with the fact that there were a lot of really big unknowns. And the unknowns came in the fact that when a car goes into water, you don't know what happens to the engine. It was rumored that the engine was okay. The intakes on the Veyron are on the top. So when the car went into the water, it's very possible that the water didn't actually go into the engine. However, when salt water goes into the body of a car, it does a lot of damage. And it could have went into the seals. The salt air could have permeated through something. And it could have damaged some cylinder liners. Those cylinder liners, not very cheap. To do any sort of rebuild on that engine would have been hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it's not even that you just pay somebody that money and they'll get it done for you in a week. This is something that would take a year or more because those materials just don't exist. A lot of the stuff is aerospace technology. So you'd have to get somebody that lives on a top of a mountain and they're like soothsayers and only they can touch this car. So all the mechanical components for like the wing, that's all aerospace stuff that's made with specific grade aluminum, and the electronics, all that stuff is super bespoke. So this project would be just the mother of all projects. However, I still thought that we could sort of do it. And honestly, I've heard that the car was sold and somebody's willing to do that project, but I kind of think that in a few months it's going to be up for sale again, just because that's sketchy history and just because it's a bit more project than anybody's willing to take on, except for possibly Ed and I. When it got out that Ed and I were trying to do this and put this together, there's so many people that kind of messaged you just on the down low and say, hey, I have an interior for a Veyron, or hey, I have some body panels for a Veyron. And they were in good shape and they were in relatively okay price ranges. Again, relatively okay, meaning $80,000 to $100,000, which is way more than I have. But for a Veyron, this was kind of standard fare. And you realize that there's sort of a black market for these cars. When they get Mansory treatments and they get all these carbon fiber body panels, or they do some sort of aftermarket stuff on the interior, the stock interior is still there. They don't throw it away. So whoever did the interior, that gets put on a shelf and then eventually sold because the owners forget about it. So that is kind of a cool takeaway. If you do end up owning a Veyron at some point, there are some parts available. Now, the problem is the parts available weren't exactly the parts that we needed. So wiring harness, not exactly available, so that would have to be done custom. All the radiators, probably not available. And engines, that's definitely not available. Nobody's replacing their engines. Nobody's doing an LS swap on their Veyron. So another thing that really concerned me is the fact that Veyron maintenance was a bit more expensive than your garden variety Honda Civic. If you just left a Veyron to sit for a few years, like this car had, then you'd be in it for tires, you'd be in it for wheels. Tires are about 25 grand. They're like these special Michelin Pax tires. You have to replace the wheels because the wheels, over time, they develop these little micro fissures, and you can't use them because that car is designed to go over 250 miles an hour. So just from that alone, that's about 80 grand. Then you have a $20,000 service. You take it to the dealer and they basically cut the car in half and they do all the things that they need to do. So that's $20,000, and that happens semi-regularly. So before you drive the car a mile, even if this car had been in perfect condition just sitting there, it's $100,000 just in maintenance. I mean, Ed and I had been talking about that for quite a long time, and he wanted to put miles on it. It's a car that he wanted to own, and he's exactly the kind of guy to own a haggard example of this, well, a haggard example of one of these cars, and just drive it around, and even daily drive it, as crazy as that sounds. So it was pretty much the perfect car for both of us. Me, for the project aspect, I've never worked on something at such an elite level, and I never worked on such a challenge. This was like the Mount Everest of project cars. And Ed never had a car that was this high of dollar value, and also the story aspect of it really intrigued him. And it was definitely a one that got away because the money just didn't make any sense. If either of us were in better financial standing, I think we probably would have done it. But in, let's say, in 6 months, when that thing is for sale again by whoever bought it, because it's too much of a project for them, then we will revisit this, and hopefully in 2020 we'll have a nice Veyron to drive around. Usually a Murcielago should have keys. So when you're like me and you're looking for cars, and you look for cars all the time, it seems to come up that your friends who look for cars also give you some really interesting tips sometimes. And I have a friend, his name is Ed. Ed gave me a tip about 4 months ago, something like that. He sent me a message saying, do you want another Lamborghini? I had bought a Lamborghini about a year back. It was a Gallardo that was fire damaged, and it's a little less fire damaged now. It makes some power, and it's a lot of fun to drive. But Ed sent me some pictures of a Lamborghini Murcielago, and this one was a little bit special. This one was the one from Fast and Furious 8. Now, I actually didn't know that they used real Lamborghinis in that movie. I thought that they were all kit cars. They kind of look like kit cars. Usually, the standard movie fare is kit cars on really expensive stuff. But since this is a Fast and Furious movie and they had a budget that was unlimited, they used 3 real Lamborghinis, and it was in a scene where the Lamborghini actually went into ice. I think it was supposed to be in Russia, but they filmed it in Iceland. In any case, one of these cars was for sale, according to Ed. And then Ed told me what the price was. And he said 80 grand. Now, 80 grand sounds like a lot. It is a lot of money. So it's more money than I've ever spent on a car. But 80 grand for a Murcielago it's just insane. There's no way you can get a Murcielago for 80 grand. So I said, what's the catch? And Ed was like, well, I haven't seen the car. And he sent me over like 3 pictures that were kind of blurry, and some parts are missing off of it. But apparently the car had a clean title, and it was owned by Universal, and it was in California. Now, Ed already had a stick LP640. I got the reins, and I got the contact info for the guy selling the car. And it turns out that this was one of 3 cars that they used for the movie. This was the hero car that you see in the movie. This is the one that Tavarish drove in the movie. And this was not the one that went into the ice. So it wasn't flood damaged. It wasn't damaged at all, really. I mean, relatively, for a movie car. And it was actually running and driving and registered. Not a salvage title, nothing like that. So at this point, I was really thinking, what's the catch? So the cheapest one in the country was about 160 grand for the early model manual non-LP car. For half price, what exactly did I get? So I decided to get my truck, my trusty dually with about 300,000 miles, and I got a trailer, and I drove across the country from Florida to California to go see this car. And if the car was good, I would buy it and drive it back. Well, tow it back. I was going to drive it sight unseen Lamborghini 2,000 miles. But so usually when you buy a used car on any auto trader or even eBay, you ask questions to the seller. You can go and test drive the car. You can do a PPI if you need to. This was not the case with this car. This was a case of, I have 3 pictures and the price of basically more than I've ever paid for a car ever. And I wouldn't be able to see the car for months. And since this was an active shop where they make cars for movies, I wouldn't get a ton of communication because they're just so busy. So I had to take it on faith that this car, 1, was there, 2, was as advertised, even though it wasn't really advertised, and 3, that it was something that I could realistically take on, because if there was something really wrong with it, I don't have that much money to fix it. I don't have 60 grand to spend on an engine if it blew. So there was a lot of faith there. But when you're dealing with stuff like this, I'm sort of used to the worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario for this car honestly wasn't that bad. I mean, you still had a stick Murcielago. I wanted to let this guy know that, hey, I'm willing to accept whatever flaws this car has. So I just gave him asking price. Now, this is not something Ed Bolian would do, but he also gave me a box of spare parts, which is really helpful for me because when I put the car back together, I'm not going to want to pay thousands of dollars for nickel and dime parts. And if anybody's going to buy the car, it has to be me. I get to the shop that does all the Fast and Furious cars, which is kind of a dream if you ask me. It's insane how they slap those cars together, but it's also really cool to see the hero cars. Like, they actually do look very good. And when I went into the shop and I saw the car for the first time, I realized why it was 80 grand. It was pretty rough. So the seats were not bolted down. One of the seats was not original to Lamborghini. It was like some racing seat that fit a very small driver. I'm not sure if that was Tyrese or not. I don't know how tall Tyrese is, but apparently from this car, not very. The passenger seat was actually the stock driver seat, just switched out. There was a roll cage that was put in the car, actually very well. The roll cage was done pretty exquisitely. It was done very expertly, except for the fact that the roll cage went through the rear window. The rear window was deleted, so when you started the car and the car had a straight pipe, since it didn't have any catalytic converters, you had real risk of carbon monoxide poisoning if you drove this car. So I didn't end up driving this car really anywhere except onto the trailer. The car had an aftermarket body kit. It had a bumper that was remade by the guys that made all the cars for the movies, because when they were filming in Iceland, the body kit kept on smashing into stuff. I mean, when you're on the ice, there are lots of things like icebergs, I guess. It's like hitting curbs out in the middle of nowhere. They had to remake the front bumper, which was not done to any sort of standard other than movie quality. If it looks good from 50 feet back, or if it looks good on a camera, then it's going to look good for them. And it was painted probably in half an hour by somebody in Iceland. There were runs everywhere in the paint. Then it came to actually starting the car. That was my real big concern, my biggest concern, because if you have a Lamborghini and the engine doesn't run, or there's a problem with the engine, then that is a very, very expensive proposition. So there's an interesting way to start this car. When you get to the car, first thing you notice is there's no keys. Usually a Murcielago should have keys. These cars aren't the easiest thing to start, even if you have all the keys and the key fob and all that stuff. It has a very finicky alarm system. Now, the alarm system was something that they didn't know about when they went out to film in Iceland. And they had a problem where they couldn't start the car. So what they did was, again, movie magic. I think they cemented the key inside the ignition cylinder because you can't take it out. You can turn it on and off, and that's it. But what they did was they made a little button in the back where the engine is, and you press that button, make sure it's in neutral, otherwise it's gonna actually drive away from you. You press that button and the car starts. So it's like a 3 or 4 step process. And also the battery's dead. So you have to have a battery box on the car, then you make sure that the key is in on position, then you press the button, and that's how you start your new Lamborghini. It's not as glamorous as you'd think. Your hands do get a little dirty, and you need a second person to prop up the hood because that doesn't stay up at all. I haven't seen a lot, but I can imagine that this one is probably the most haggard one that anyone has ever seen. However, for my purposes, this is the perfect car. I had a friend, his name is Mark, also known as Gutter Snake from the DDE channel, and I had the car on that lift. And we looked at everything around the car. We looked at the suspension underneath. We looked at the engine, all that stuff. And he gave it a clean bill of health. I was very surprised. I thought that there was going to be something really wrong with it, like it had been, hit by, I don't know, polar bear. I don't know. What's out in Iceland? Polar bears? I don't know. That car checks out. The bones are very, very good, and I can't wait to start driving it. I think I will do like a rear-wheel drive conversion because that has some aftermarket wheels on it, has 19s in the front and 20s in the back, which makes it look kind of ridiculous, but I know that the differentials on that car don't like that. I want to have it restored to what a good version of what that movie car looks like. So right now with the basically falling off bumper and the horrible paint, that has to go. But the ethos, so the core of that car is going to stay intact. I never thought in a million years that in a year I'd be able to buy not even one, but two Lamborghinis, and also a Ferrari, well, kind of half a Ferrari at this point, and document the process. So I'm really grateful. And I'm really grateful to Ed. Without him, I wouldn't be, obviously sitting here, but I wouldn't have this amazing car. And he also let me know that if any car should be bought, then this one should be bought by me specifically, because this is kind of what I do. So there's always cars that you buy looking to make a quick buck, just to flip it or something. And there's also cars that have such an interesting story that you have to keep them around. I'm never gonna find this car again. This is in a really big budget blockbuster movie. It's an orange Lamborghini. It's a manual, and it's also the cheapest one in the country, if not the world. So it's one that's gonna stay in my now stable of exotic cars. And it's one that I don't think I'm ever going to sell. So for $80,000, I think that's kind of worth it.